Welcome back to Woke Nation. This should be episode 53, I believe. Um, yeah, episode 53 on June the 17th. Uh, uh, this is kind of going to be a little bit of a mishmash of an episode, different ideas being thrown around. So to kick it off, I wanted to kind of pick up more or less, a little bit at least, where I left off the past two or three episodes. If I remember correctly, last episode I talked about how children are being affected by the different ideologies and activities of the activists here in this country who are really eroding the idea of what truth is and whether truth is an actual thing with a objective foundation or is really subjective and can be found in each and every single one of us and vary between each and every single one of us. And so really there is no such thing as truth ultimately. And I talked about how children really this is going to harm them, and how our activities in the culture, in the country, are really detrimental to our children, from abortion to the transgender and gay rights movement and things like that. And then before that, I talked about Pride Month because June is the Pride Month. It's been designated as Pride Month, I should say. And then before that, abortion. So to start this one off, since it's kind of a mishmash of different things, I actually wrote down in my notebook just 5 questions I would want to ask, like a transgender person, or actually specifically. I don't know. I would ask a transgender person because I think they would have a more of an honest view of what actually the movement entails and what they really believe because they're actually living it out, as opposed to some of these activists who I think really have a raw agenda and don't really think through the inherent contradictions of the transgender philosophy, if you want to call it that. But let me just, yeah, I'm going to just do that to start this off. Just read off the 5 questions that are here in this notebook. By the way, this is a bamboo sheath notebook that my wife got me. I forget where she got it, but I would recommend it to everybody. Writing on bamboo paper makes you feel oddly intellectual, even if what you're writing is pure gibberish. Anyway. 5 questions for transgenders. So the first one, and anybody can answer this if you're in the transgender community. And I'm not saying this to try to, even though obviously if you've ever listened to any of the episodes that I've done in the past, you know that I disagree completely with the whole transgender movement. I think it's flawed and, well, I'm not going to rehash my opinions of it. But they can speak for themselves. So, I disagree completely with it. I think it's wrong-headed on every level, and a rejection of obvious reality. But that doesn't mean I hate anyone that's involved in it. If you've listened to my past episodes, you'll know that my anger or my vitriol is more for the activists who are pursuing, I think, this movement with a ferocity that knows no caution, that they're not concerned at all with the impact, the negative impact, and they're not thinking about at all whether there is a negative impact to these movements, the gay rights movement, gay marriage, transgenderism, or any of this stuff, abortion, the whole progressive leftist, although I hate the term leftist, but the whole progressive movement that we're seeing in this country, political correctness, all that. The activists that are really at the forefront of fighting those battles, like the Hollywood people, like Alyssa Milano and all them, those are the people I hold in contempt because they're in a position to know. They know better. They have the information in front of them. They know that life, for instance, according to, they claim on the one hand, when it comes to issues of evolution and God and everything like that, that they're very interested in what the scientific community has to say. They say empirical evidence that can be tested by science is the only thing that will pass their standard for what truth is. But then when it comes to the transgender or the homosexual movements, all of a sudden that just takes flight and it vanishes. They are no longer interested in science or what biology has to say. And then all that stuff is their enemy. So you see how they twist and contort like a serpent, like a snake trying to be pinned down. They really have no absolute truth to them. It's just truth is a convenience to them, and a lie can become truth just as easily if it suits their purpose. That's why I hold them in contempt, and they have no regard whatsoever for whether all this stuff that they're doing, these lies that they're telling, are having any kind of impact on the children that are coming up, the next generation. And they're using the school system and the Hollywood media unit or powerhouse, whatever you want to call it, to spread what they believe, their ideology, directly to children, intentionally to the younger generations, the ones coming up, to mold them as they would see fit. That's why I despise these people, and I have a lot of contempt for them. Now, I mean, I would say we should pray for them, obviously, because the obvious truth is, but for the grace of God, go all of us. I would say myself included. I mean, if it weren't for God's grace, I would be doing and saying the same thing. These ideas are not just wrong ideas; they're the product of a darkened, reprobate mind, one that is at enmity war with God. I believe that. I really do. Otherwise, you can't come to any sort of understanding. It defies logic. It defies reason. It defies reality. So why do they still hold to it? Well, it's obvious. There's much more at stake here than just reality. And this is the antithesis, or not the antithesis, but like a picture, an image of a spiritual reality here, of a refusal to yield. And that's what it is. That's what transgenderism is at the heart of it, and abortion, I would say. A refusal to yield to a sovereign being. It's giving the finger or shaking your fist at the heavens and saying, you will not define who I am or how I'm going to live my life or what is real. I'm going to make my own reality. I'm my own God. That's what's at the heart of it. I'm fully convinced of that. How else do you explain their total rejection of reality, of biological, logical, philosophical, ontological? You could go through the list. They defy every single standard, a model that humanity has come up with for seeking truth and reality and what is real and what is not. They defy it at every turn. In its biology, scientifically, philosophically, empirically, ontological being, it doesn't matter. They contradict each other at every level. Anyway, I could go on and on, as I have for the past few episodes. Maybe you're tired of it. I don't know. But, I think this stuff's important. But anyway, just 5 questions, and then I'm going to move on real quickly to the second part, which is Steven Crowder and what's happened with him on YouTube, demonetization, and Carlos Meza, I think, or Meza, or Menza, or whatever his name is, from Vox.com. I want to get into that real quick. This won't be a very long episode, but be that as it may. All right, so the first question: if gender and sex are just a societal construct, why the insistence that you are one particular gender or another? Why does it matter? So obviously, yeah, if gender and sex are just illusions made up by society, why is there this deep insistence that you are one gender or another? Now, I realize there are some people within the movement that do not claim to be one or the other. They just pass between genders arbitrarily. One day they're one day they're another. But they cannot escape the fact that they identify at some point as one gender or another. So why does that matter? Why is it so important if these things are just merely societal constructs? Number two, if anatomy doesn't indicate sex, why do transgenders transition to appear as the sex they claim to be? This is a very obvious question. If anatomy, the way you appear, and your sexual organs don't make you a particular gender, that's just a visual, sex assigned at birth, then why is a man that transitions into a woman so dedicated a lot of the time? I realize these are broad questions and they don't include everyone within the movement. There are people that don't transition, but generally speaking, there is a dedicated visual effort to transform yourself into the gender which you feel like you should be. And if anatomy doesn't indicate sex, why do transgenders transition to appear as the sex they claim to be? Number three, when a man who is trans claims to, quote, feel like a woman, on what basis does he have for such a claim? Since he is a man, he can have no knowledge for how a woman feels. The second part is obviously my statement, but it's an obvious question too. When a man who is transitioning into a woman says, "I feel like a woman," by what basis do you know what a woman feels like? You've never been a woman, number one, so there's no association there. There's no ground. You have no experience off of which to base how a woman feels. And how does a woman feel anyway? Many women can't explain how a woman feels. I can't explain how a man feels. That's why biology and sexual characteristics is so crucial. These things do determine sex. How does a man feel? I have no idea. It's a perspective, it's a way of thinking, but I have no way to know exactly what it is unless I can base it off of something else that it's not, and that would be female. But I've never been a woman, so I have no idea what that may be like. If you can't adequately describe the feeling of being a man, then there is no way that you can describe the feeling of being something you've never been. Four, as a trans person, how do you know your trans identity is really you? How do you know this trans identity is really you and your birth identity is not? So the very obvious, or I think it's obvious, that if all this stuff is subjective, there's no objective truth. How do you know for certain that the way you feel is really who you are, and that your biological, obviously, physical reality is not the real you? How do you know that? How can you trust your feelings? And this gets into whether you believe in God or evolution or stuff like that, whether the chemicals fizzing in your brain is all there is to thought process, or whether that God designed it and it's based off of laws and reason that he placed there. But the question remains, how do you know to trust your feelings that you are one and not the other? And then number five, lastly, if biology isn't indicative of gender, what is a man and what is a woman? So obviously, if our biology doesn't determine what a man is or what a woman is, then what is a man and what is a woman? And if you can't define that, then how is it that you can say that I'm a woman? Or if you're a man and you want to be a woman, or even if you're just a man who's confused, how can you say what is one and what is another if biology, the biological differences between a man and a woman are irrelevant? Then how do you define it? And I mean, this is crucial because you're going off of a definition and you're creating for yourself a new definition. And if you can't define the original at all, then how do you define the new? So anyway, those are my 5 questions. I don't know if anyone will bother to reply to them. Who knows? But moving on, I wanted to talk very briefly and quickly about the whole Steven Crowder thing. Steven Crowder, for those who don't know, is a conservative, claims to be a Christian conservative comedian. And I shouldn't say the word claims, or I shouldn't say claims to be, because, I have no idea. He may truly be a Christian. He claims to be a Christian, so I'm just going to say Steven Crowder is a Christian conservative comedian on YouTube. He has a YouTube show. I think it's called Louder with Crowder. He has almost 4 million subscribers on there, so his show is huge. And he has frequent battles back and forth of opinion with like the Young Turks Network, which is a socialist, with Cenk Uygur or Unger or something like that. Cenk Uygur, I forget his name, but Cenk Uygur is the host of the Young Turks, and he and Steven Crowder go back and forth. Whoops, I bumped the camera. But anyway, Steven Crowder, his show is a daily, I think it's a daily show on YouTube. He uses a lot of humor and comedy and skits and sketches and jokes to, kind of parody and criticize and lampoon the progressive left ideological movement here in America. As far as shows go, by today's standard, he's edgy because he's not politically correct. But by any real standard whatsoever, Steven Crowder is very tame. He doesn't curse. His jokes, as far as like sexual humor or whatever, are very chaste overall. I mean, he can be a little crude sometimes, but on the whole, compared to a lot of the comedians out there in the skits, even some other conservative comedians like Owen Benjamin or Gavin McInnes, this Steven Crowder is very tame. He doesn't use profanity, and there's no nudity or that kind of stuff. So in that sense, maybe he lives up to like having a Christian standard for his show. But anyway, the reason he's kind of been in the news lately with YouTube is that he has been consistently, and again, I do want to emphasize, I don't really watch a whole lot of Steven Crowder. I mean, I've watched some of his show here and there on YouTube. He's very famous for that change your mind videos that he makes, where he goes to rallies or pro-life or pro-choice rallies, and he says, I'm pro-life, change my mind. And he sets up a table there and films it. Those videos get millions of views. They're interesting to watch. I don't think anyone's changed his mind yet, but I don't watch a whole ton of Steven Crowder. It's just not my cup of tea. But anyway, he's been making a lot of videos about a particular journalist named Carlos Menza, I believe is how his last name is pronounced, Menza or Meza, who is a gay journalist. I think he's Hispanic too, obviously. Carlos, duh, what clued you in? From Vox.com. And Vox, for those who don't know about Vox is incredibly liberal, incredibly progressive. I mean, it encapsulates all the things that I talk about, that I criticize and think are the downfall of Western civilization. The trans movement, everything that is liberal and that I'm against, Vox celebrates. Abortion, the gay rights movement, even though it may shock some conservatives and Christians to know, from a legal perspective, I'm not against gay people getting married. Now I'm open to be convinced one way or another on the issue, but I just think in our system of government here, I don't think that that's the hill we should die on. I think the battle should be fought in the culture, not legislatively. I don't think that we should legislate those types of things. But anyway, so Steven Crowder was making these videos about Carlos Meza, and Carlos Meza makes a lot of videos for Vox.com in which he criticizes conservatives, calls them racists and bigots and homophobes, all the traditional slanders for a worldview that he just plain doesn't understand, obviously, and has no interest in understanding, from what I can tell. I've watched some of his videos. I'm pretty familiar with Vox.com. Vox, on the whole, is very hostile towards Christianity, towards Christians, the Christian worldview, towards the idea of a savior coming and dying, the concept of a sovereign God who one day we will stand before and give an account of every thought, word, and deed. Vox hates that idea. morality and truth is relative. It's incumbent of the person that you're speaking to define their own truth and morality, etc. Pro-abortion, pro-gay rights, pride all the way, pro-transgender, um, open borders. I mean, you name it. Anything that conservatives are against, take the guns away, anti-Second Amendment, not pro-free speech. They are not for free speech, as we'll see in a second. But anyway, so Steven Crowder made a lot of videos making fun of Carlos Meza. Now, first, I do want to say I watched Carlos Meza on Twitter put together a clip of a lot of the videos that Steven Crowder made making fun of him. And this part of it, I don't like what Steven Crowder did. And, some people in the conservative movement will probably call me a traitor or something like that for saying this. I should stick with the herd. But I don't like I don't agree with Carlos Meza or his worldview. I don't believe homosexuality is right. I think it's a sin. I think it's a perversion of the natural order that God intended. You could say I disagree with him on just virtually everything you could disagree with a person on. And I think that his worldview is contributing to the decline of society, Western civilization, our culture, and that it's a representation of God pulling out his restraint. Okay, so that's harsh. I realize that. But at the same time, I don't like the way Steven Crowder was talking about him, calling him queer, making fun of his lisp. Gay people have affected kind of feminine lisp. I'm not going to do it to make fun of them, but it's very easy to make fun of people, and it's a lot harder to actually deconstruct, take seriously their arguments, and show why they're wrong. And Steven Crowder does that too. I'm not saying he doesn't, but I think it's very easy to fall into a habit of just mocking and ridiculing something rather than seriously deconstructing it for intelligent audiences. Now, I mean, again, Steven Crowder's show is a comedy show. It's meant to entertain and be funny, and generally speaking, from what I've seen, he is. But I don't think that claiming to be a Christian and then mocking somebody, calling them a lispy queer and all this kind of stuff is what we should be doing. I just don't. And I don't want to be a hypocrite because I know that I've done things exactly like that in the past. I have. I admit it. There may be people that would watch this video right here that would say, be screaming at the screen right now that I'm a hypocrite. And it would be true to an extent. Yes, I've said those kinds of things. I've made fun of people for that kind of stuff in the past. Of course I have. I think if everybody was honest, we all have. Just be honest. And that's not a good thing. And I would agree to an extent with the gay community that needs to change. Whether you agree with their lifestyle or not, mocking them and ridiculing them is not the right response. Now, Steven Crowder defends his humor and what he was doing by saying that it was a response to Carlos Menza's demonization of Crowder and conservatives, and how Carlos Meza on Vox with his own videos routinely lies about conservatives, demonizes them, calls them bigots and homophobes, and is now using hate speech, Steven Crowder's hate speech, to try to silence him. So that's how Crowder would defend it, and how he kind of does. I don't think that holds water, because as a Christian, he should know that you don't return evil for evil. You don't engage in the same sins that somebody's enacting on you. You treat others how you would want to be treated. Now, again, it's a comedy show, So I get you have to be funny and a little bit, you want to be a little edgy, because that's just what people respond to today. But there's a way to do that without mocking somebody for affecting a lisp, a queer lisp, a gay lisp. We all know it, the effeminate tone that a man affects. when he's gay. You don't have to stoop to that level. There were other things that were in the video, but that's the gist of it. It wasn't, Crowder wasn't using the word fag. Not that I heard, at least. I've never heard him say that. I don't think so. Maybe he has. I don't know. I don't watch his show all that much, but and if he has said that word, as much again as I disagree with the gay rights movement, that's not a word you should use. It's just not. I mean, we shouldn't intentionally be offensive in an insulting way. There's ways that you should be offensive. The gospel is offensive. Truth is offensive to people who are living a lie. That's far different thing than being offensive in an insulting manner, directly insulting somebody's lifestyle. Christ didn't do that. Christ didn't go and call people the F word, or make fun of their lisp because they were gay. He sat down with them and told them about their sin, and basically said, you need go and sin no more. And that's offensive to anyone who's a sinner, whether you're saved or not. That's offensive because there's still that battle there over your sin, a spiritual battle over your sin nature. Even if you're a Christian, you still fight that. So there's going to be a level to which that's still offensive at certain points, not all the time, because God's given you a new heart, and you want to seek after him, but you're still going to struggle with sin. And so there will still be times when you're going to resist, God's will, or resist wanting to please him, perhaps, or his sovereignty. We're far from perfect. And I'm speaking of myself generally. I struggle with all these things from time to time. I'll find myself, oh, God's sovereign in that way. Well, I keep hitting the camera. Shows you I'm not sovereign. But I'll find myself struggling with that sometimes. I'll know God's sovereign in a certain way, and I'll just feel myself kind of resisting it a little bit, like, nah, I want to make decisions there, and that's our sin nature. You got to fight against that and suppress it. Pray about it more realistically. But so I think these are the appropriate responses to an opposing worldview that's anti-biblical or anti-Christian. Just because Carlos Meza was lying about conservatives or making derogatory videos that claim that all Christians are all conservatives are bigots or homophobes. I mean, we've all heard the videos at this point. If you're conservative, you're well aware that the media is labeling you a hypocrite and a bigot and a racist and a homophobe and a transphobe and an Islamophobe and a xenophobe. And basically, we just live in absolute fear of the entire world. The only thing we're not afraid of is other conservatives as far as they're concerned. That's the way they think of it, obviously. But I think this is a free speech issue with Carlos Meza and Steven Crowder. Regardless of whether you agree with how Steven Crowder has talked about Carlos Meza, what Carlos Meza did was he went to YouTube and applied pressure on them to basically try to get Steven Crowder kicked off of the platform because of the language that he used. That's unacceptable. Whether you like what somebody's saying about you or not, whether it's Christian or not, we live in a society dominated by free speech. That's the underpinning of our society. If you remove free speech, we don't have a whole heck of a lot else to go off of. Free speech is the like I said, the underpinning, and if you remove it, all the other freedoms collapse directly. It's what holds them all up. That's your foundation for a free society, is free speech. The right to engage in dialogue, to disagree, to have a conversation, to express your views, to give a point of view that is in direct conflict with maybe the majority of the people in the country. All these things, that is the foundation for a free society, I think, humanly speaking. There's other things I think that are important too that are just as foundational, but from a human perspective, from a open society, open free society that allows all belief systems to at least exist within it freely and not be persecuted, that is the foundation. And so what Carlos Meza is doing is obviously wrong. Now, again, this brings up the old debate that we've been having for quite some time over these platforms, whether Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, whether these are just platforms and can decide who says what on them, or whether that makes them publishers and that they are, I keep hitting the camera. It's not an earthquake here. I live in Pennsylvania. I don't think we've had an earthquake, although we did have a tornado in Denver about 2 weeks ago, um, which is still an hour from here, and I don't think those are the reverberations from it. That's still me hitting the camera. But anyway, where was I at? I forget. But yeah, these platforms, are they publishers? Should they be held accountable for every single thing posted on them? Well, that's what they're afraid of. So they say we're open to every belief, which is clearly not true. Clearly, YouTube, all of them, they ban certain specific viewpoints. So it's coming to the point where they're obviously a publisher. And what I think needs to happen, and what has already started to happen, but what should have happened a lot sooner, is some people say the government should break these platforms up. There's too much there, too much power over the national and indeed the global conversation. Facebook has 2.3 billion people on it. I think I could be wrong, but I think it's there's over a billion people on Facebook worldwide, obviously. So you remove somebody from Facebook, you're essentially taking them out of the public square. Twitter has 320 million, 320 plus, maybe I think 326 million people on it. That's an enormous public square right there. Instagram is it's got to be up there with the rest of them. YouTube also. Enormous amounts of people and traffic and dialogue. When we talk about things the president says, it's very often tweets on Twitter. This is our public square. They are. And I've become convinced over time to agree with people that say these are like public utilities, in the same way the phone company would be. I think it needs to approach that level, and there needs to be some sort of regulation. I've heard people like Paul Joseph Watson, who's been arbitrarily banned from different platforms himself. I think he's off of Facebook and Twitter now, or he might still be on Twitter. I'm not sure, but either way, he's talked about how they need to come up with an Internet Bill of Rights. I think Tucker Carlson said the same thing. I agree with that. I think the Wild West is over. The Internet used to be this kind of Wild West place of freedom where you could express any view on Reddit or some of these other sites, and it didn't matter how profane or disgusting it may be. It was allowed. If you didn't like it, the user, could choose not to read that specific comment, or you could mute that person. But the platforms stayed out of it. Well, that's over now. There's too much power there, and people, absolute power corrupts absolutely. People like Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook and Jack Dorsey with Twitter, they've seen the potential to control speech and shape dialogue and the way the country formulates ideas and opinions, and they're taking advantage of it. And they're specifically doing it before the 2020 election. I think that's basically a given now. Why do you think people like Milo Yiannopoulos and Alex Jones and Laura Loomer have been removed from the vast majority of these platforms? I think Milo's on Twitter now, or not Twitter, YouTube, and that's it. Same with Laura Loomer. But they've both been removed from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the big names. Gavin McInnes is being removed from every known platform. Alex Jones has been taken off every single one of the major ones. This is not an accident. These are the people that are influential with young voters. Alex Jones had millions of subscribers on all these platforms. Milo, very popular with the young crowd. Laura Loomer, I don't like her particularly, but she was also gaining a lot of steam, and it was just very coincidental that she got banned right at the height of her impact. Excuse me. The same could be said for any of them. Paul Joseph Watson, obviously very influential, big following. So it's just very suspicious that leading up to 2020, a lot of the big influential names are suddenly being just vacuum, just sucked out of the public conversation, just gone, gone, gone. Why is that? Are they not allowed to have an opinion? Obviously not in polite society. But who are the arbiters of polite society? Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey. And that's a scary thing that these handfuls, these couple men, because Mark Zuckerberg also owns Instagram. These guys have a tremendous amount of power, too much power. And what I was saying should have happened, it is happening, but it should have happened a lot sooner, is that competing platforms should have arisen up and been given the attention that they deserve to compete with these companies. We have Gab, which Gab, I think, people go back and forth over how many people are actually on Gab. I'm on there. I think it has around 1 million users, so it's one of the bigger, if not the biggest. Besides, I think there's Minds.com. And now there's Parlay, and it's spelled Parlar, and it's the French word parler, like to speak, I guess. Is a hit, at least, and a lot of people are on that. Thousands and thousands of people have been rushing over there, and it's set up a lot like Twitter. You have echoes instead of tweets. So these things are rising up, and Jordan Peterson, apparently the conservative, well, he's not conservative, but the thinker and the philosopher and the psychologist is starting his own platform. Good, great, and I hope a lot of people leave these Twitter type places and go to those Jordan Peterson and Gab and Parlay or whatever. I hope people flock to them. Facebook needs to be broken up. Same with Twitter. Too much power there, and the people with the power are not interested in free speech by any means. They are interested in their own opinions and theirs alone, and that's it. You know. So the Steven Crowder thing, I think at its bottom level, is frightening in that it's just another conservative who, whether you agree with the fact that he said the word queer or he was making fun of Carlos Meza or any of that, whether you actually agree with it or not, at the end of the day, it's once again somebody trying to silence somebody else who they don't like. Carlos Meza is trying to silence Steven Crowder because he does not like Steven Crowder. That's what it is at the end of the day. Now, also, very quickly, I will say that part of Carlos Meza's complaint against Steven Crowder is that a lot of Steven Crowder's followers have used very hateful language against him, tried to dox him, which means put his personal information out there on the internet, call him very derogatory names, and flood his inbox on email or whatever with threatening messages and just all kinds of garbage. That's wrong, of course, but you know what? That's what happens when you're a public figure on the internet. It doesn't make it right, but we could go to anybody there. Steven Crowder gets his own fair share of death threats and hate mail, not to mention everybody else. You come join the conservative side, buddy. All of us, all not me. I'm nobody really, but all of us in the conservative movement are labeled haters and bigots and phobes of every stripe and kind, by people like Carlos Meza. And so we're effectively silenced from the public sphere. So this goes both ways, to say that it's just Steven Crowder's followers saying horrible things is just that's giving a very narrow view on what happens on the internet. Everybody's followers say everything to everyone, whether you're liberal or conservative. It doesn't make it right, but this doxing, as evil as it is, goes on by both sides, okay? So if we're going to remove people from platforms over it, then it should be on both sides, because both sides do this stuff all the time. In fact, there was a liberal representative named Brian Sims who was going out to Planned Parenthood places, sites, Planned Parenthood sites, and he videotaped himself going up to pro-life young 14-year-old girls and offering money to people on the streets to dox them so they could be harassed and attacked and slandered and whatever. The question was left totally open as to what would happen to them. He was offering money to people to dox these teenage, underage, not adult, 13, 14-year-old girls, trying to dox them just because they had a point of view that didn't align with his. So don't tell me that this is just Steven Crowder's problem. This is a problem on both sides. And people, if we're going to remove them from a platform over it, shouldn't we start with the people that claim to represent us in our government? If they are doing this, shouldn't it start with them? Shouldn't they be the model for how citizens should lawfully behave? Brian Sims. So if people are going to be removed from platforms for doxing or attempting to dox people, shouldn't it be our representatives if they are guilty of it first and foremost? So Brian Sims for a start. And then we can get down to Steven Crowder's followers afterwards. But Steven Crowder didn't try to dox Carlos Meza. It was his followers. And so removing him from a platform does absolutely nothing to the people that actually tried to dox Carlos Meza. So it's an arbitrary accusation. It means nothing to actually what is at stake here or what the problem actually is. It's just Carlos Meza crying into the microphone, basically. I don't have much sympathy for him. I do not agree with the language that Steven Crowder used, but I have very little sympathy for Carlos Meza because he does the very same things that Steven Crowder complains about, or that he complains Steven Crowder is doing to him. It's just Steven Crowder happens to be funnier than him is really what it comes to at the end of the day, and he's more influential, and he's funnier, and more people listen to him and respond to the stuff that he says. And Carlos Meza, at the end of the day, is boring, and most of his videos can be easily debunked. So, anyway, I've gone on long enough. This was episode 53. I keep knocking this camera. I'm not going to edit it, though. That shows how real I am. This is reality TV. You can see the sweat on my forehead. My wife told me I need to put makeup on or something, but nah. It ain't gonna happen. I'm a man. Men do not wear makeup. I'm sorry. I know that's a homophobic thing to say, but whatever. Hopefully I don't get removed for saying it from whatever platform I'm on. Anyway, episode 53. Somebody's race car outside the window. That's a good sign to stop. All right, so I'll meet you again next week. Not sure what it'll be on, but there will be an episode as always. In the meantime, good night and God be with you.